What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today I'm going to bring you the most in-depth Dominaria pre-release guide you'll find on the whole YouTubes. Now, first of all, and briefly, what is a pre-release? How do those work, in case you've never done it before? This is actually a really good event to kind of get you comfortable with more organized play. They're always super chill, really good vibes at pre-release events for the most part, and they're super simple the way they work. The way this one works is they're just going to give you 6 packs of Dominaria, plus 1 foil-stamped rare or mythic card from the set. It can be any rare or mythic from the whole set, super random. And after you crack all those packs open, you get to take that whole card pool and build a 40 card deck out of that. That includes basic lands, by the way, which the shop should provide for you. Now, usually a good number of lands to play in your sealed deck is 17, unless you've got a lot of big ticket items with high mana cost, or your deck is way more defensive than the average deck, then you'll play 18 lands. But for the most part, 17 is the key number. That leaves you about 23 slots to play around with, and you open just over 90 cards or so. So you're only using about a quarter of the cards you actually open. So tough question becomes, what's good, what's not? What do you cut and what do you put in? And that's where we come in here. The rest of this video is basically just going to be giving you the best cards in every single color. Now, the color wheel goes white, blue, black, red, green, so we'll start at the very top here with a color that has been turning in strong performances in sealed environments for the last few sets here, and that is white. There's a lot of standout commons and uncommons in this color. A lot of them look like really good role players. I'll start with the 3 I like the most: Danitha, Seal Away, and Sarah Angel. Now, Danitha is actually a strong creature on her own. You know, you don't really have to augment her too much to make her good. In combat, she's fine. She's a decent blocker and attacker, and she can do both thanks to Vigilance. And First Strike and Lifelink is actually a really good combination. But she starts a trend of creatures that we'll see in both white and red that look really good when you do get auras on them. If you just get one decent aura on a Danitha, she can take over a game really fast, and they have to do something about it. I think Danny looks really strong whether you're getting set up or you've already dropped an aura and equipment on her and just swinging away. This looks like a really serious threat once you're actually able to start building that battleship a little bit. So I love the rarity on this. She has no business being uncommon whatsoever, but since she is, you got a pretty good shot of running into her. Same thing with Seal Away. This is premium removal in the format, and it's at the uncommon slot, so you got a good shot of picking up a copy or 2 of this. Especially if you can get 2 copies, that'd be amazing. But this is all-star removal both in this sealed environment and the upcoming standard environment. You play as many of these as you see. And Sarah Angel, golden oldie, she's lost a little bit of luster over the years, but she's still going to be one of the best creatures in just about any sealed environment that she's in, and that hasn't changed in 25 years. 3 other white uncommons I really like are Baird, Sanctum Seeker, and Triumph of Gerard. Now, Triumph of Gerard has a pretty high floor and a really high ceiling, honestly. You know, it looks like at worst this card's going to put a counter or 2 on a creature and then they remove it. But if not, that 3rd turn that it's in play, it's going to deal a lot. You're going to deal a lot of damage with an attacking creature, and you're going to gain a lot of life back and just make one creature into an unstoppable like powerhouse for a turn. And that can really turn the tide in the game on turn 5 or 6 in sealed. So I like Triumph of Gerard. Again, I think the ceiling is very high on this. There is a cost to tempo, there's a cost to speed, but I think it's worth it in the end. Sanctum Seeker is just ultimately a really solid creature, you know? This has 2 desirable keyword abilities. Both lifelink and the potential to be indestructible are amazing, especially in the sealed environment. These are 2 great abilities. I do worry that without being able to feed an artifact or another historic card to it, then it's a little bit too, low toughness for its mana cost. 4 mana for a 2 toughness creature is something I don't usually like, but if you do have a way to feed it a card or 2 and keep it in the game, it can be a tough card for an opponent to fight out from under. Indestructible plus lifelink is actually a pretty good combination. And Baird, this is another legend that looks like it has no business being uncommon. It just is, decent stats for its mana cost, and you get a keyword ability. Plus, this tax ability looks pretty decent in this sealed environment. There's a lot of huge creatures and big dumb spells and really, expensive kicker costs and stuff that people are going to be trying to pull off. And I like the tax because it lets them do all that stuff if they want to, but they're not going to be able to attack on the turns where they do that big splashy stuff. It can actually be important all the way into the later turns in this sealed environment from what I can tell. But white's no slouch at the common slot either. There's a lot of pretty good creatures, especially in common at white, that I'd be interested in playing, like Sergeant at Arms, Pegasus Courser, and Davenant Trapper. Sergeant-at-Arms just has the potential to be a board in a box. I like any creature in Limited that can put multiple creatures out at the same time. It's a bit of a high costed 6 mana, but there are going to be times in the later game where you rip this off the top of your deck, on turn 8 or 9, and it's a great play to help you, either get ahead on board position or get back from board position. Their opponent's been able to remove a couple of your creatures. So I like Sergeant-at-Arms. Again, I like pretty much any creature in Sealed that brings extra creatures along with it. Pegasus Courser is another kind of creature I like in Sealed. We've seen a lot of these recently in different Sealed environments, Basically a creature that flies, and when it attacks, it lets other creatures fly. These are always extremely strong, and you want to play a couple of copies of this if you're in white. And Davenant Trapper has at least decent stats for its mana cost. It trades with an awful lot of stuff at its mana cost and in the 4-drop slot too. So that's pretty decent in and of itself, but if you just cast 1 or 2 historic spells and get to tap something down when you do so, I think you've gotten all the value you need out of this card. It's decent. But the other commons I really like in white are Gideon's Reproach, Blessed Light, and Adamant Will. As far as Adamant Will, just about every color got a playable common combat trick in this set. Some colors even got 2, and this is white's, and this is a very, very good one. 2 mana is about as much as I'd want to pay for this effect, but it's by no means expensive, obviously. And +2/+2 and Indestructible is enough for a lot of creatures to win the fight against whatever they're up against. So I actually really like this as a common combat trick. And Blessed Light and Gideon's Reproach are both, good playable removal spells. The mana cost on Blessed Light is a little bit high, but I like the flexibility. Not only is the Exile clause there, that's extra gravy, but it can take out literally any creature in the Sealed environment, and it can take out enchantments like Sagas that you might have to deal with. Or, say maybe they cast Seal Away on one of your best guys. Well, Blessed Light can take care of that for you. So I like the flexibility here, and it's just good old-fashioned removal. As far as Reproach goes, I like this spell a lot. Whether the creature's attacking or blocking, it's a low-cost way to deal with 80-some-odd% of the creatures in the Sealed environment. I'd play Reproach. Now, just to sort of clean things up in white here, there are some other cards that I want to bring up before I move on to the next color. Those being Knight of Grace, Quinde, and Dauntless Bodyguard. I think all of these are fantastic. Knight of Grace and its black analog are both great creatures. And by the way, note the synergy with Quinde if you somehow get both of these creatures, and it's not unheard of. Both of them are uncommon. It's entirely possible you encounter both of them. Then, both knights, the white and black ones, have good synergy with Quinde. So that's pretty cool. And Quinde is another one of those creatures, by the way, just like Danitha, that, if you drop an aura on it, it becomes ridiculous. And there's a number of ways, whether it's auras or, at instant speed, to give creatures first strike in the Sealed environment, and all of those work really well with Quinde. You'll hear me bring him up a few times in this video. I think Quinde is actually pretty decent if you can come across a copy of it. Even if you just run it dry the entire game, it's still, essentially a 4-mana, 4-power guy, which is fine. In Dauntless Bodyguard, now usually I don't necessarily like 1-drops in Sealed unless they're really good, and this is a really good 1-drop. I like this just about as much as I like Sky Marcher Aspirant, because it's a 1-drop that's decent when you drop it on turn 1, and it's a 1-drop that's decent when you drop it on turn 5 or 6 and you target one of your best guys with it. There's a lot of really exciting, cool legends that you want to play with at like 4, 5, and 6 mana in this environment, and you want to protect them, and Dauntless Bodyguard is a good way of doing that, or getting in damage in the early game, or trading with their 2 or sometimes even 3-drop creatures. So as far as 1-drops go, I think that Dauntless Bodyguard is one of the best that we've seen for a Sealed environment in a really long time. Now, overall, white is a solid color, again, in this Sealed environment, It doesn't have any, super crazy blowout giant flying threats or whatever that just end the game on their own and you just coast to victory off of them. White doesn't usually have that, though. Now, it does have things like Lyra Dawnbringer. It's got Sarah Angel, but it just doesn't have a high concentration of crazy bombs or anything. White works with other colors well, and it works with itself well, even, too. So, it's a good support color as it usually is. Decent creatures, but nothing crazy for the most part, and decent removal, but not a giant concentration of it. Again, white's a good support color in this environment. It works well whether you're trying to build, the white-red auras / equipments deck, the Knights deck with white and black, the green-white tokens deck that may exist in the Sealed environment, and obviously the draft environment too. All of those archetypes I think are going to be things in draft, but there's a decent way, there's a decent chance chance that you can also build these archetypes in the sealed environment given that you get the right cards. So I think that white's a great support color when building very specific kinds of decks, and it can hold its own, but it's not going to be your star color 90% of the time. As such, I'll give white a good solid B this time around. Not a bad color by any stretch of the imagination, but probably not the best color either. Now that brings us to blue. Now, honestly, blue doesn't have as many standout uncommons as I'd like it to, but the ones that it does have are really good, like Time of Ice, Merfolk Trickster, and even Slin Voda. Now, Time of Ice looks great to me. This is uncommon, and it's decent, quote-unquote removal in blue. Not only does this freeze down 2 whole creatures for you, but on that 3rd turn, it's going to snap back anything to their hand that they attacked you with last turn, plus the creatures that, have been tapped down with it so far. So I like Time of Ice actually an awful lot. Pretty high initial investment, but it can do a lot of work for you before it's all said and done. It can slow down the game an awful lot so you can set up a game plan. As far as Merfolk Trickster, this is just an all-star, man. This is a pretty decent body for its casting cost, although it is a little bit tough to cast. That's the most difficult thing about the card, honestly. But aside from that, it's great, and there's fittingly a lot of tricks you can do with it. Flash it in on blocks, make creatures lose all their abilities, and get in, whether the creature flies or whether it has been gifted abilities by auras or something like that. Merfolk Trickster can take care of all of that and set up double and even triple blocks sometimes to take down stuff that you really have no business taking down. As far as Slin Voda goes, this doesn't look like much. It's ridiculously expensive, but if you do get this off the top of your library in the very, very late game, it can win you the game more or less by itself. You're going to have an enormous dude out, and you just return to everything else, essentially, to everyone else's hands. So I really like this guy. Even if you don't kick it, it's still, costs a lot of mana, but it's almost guaranteed to be the biggest creature on the battlefield, regardless of whether you kick it or not. So as far as an uncommon goes, this is about as big of a bomb as you can get. Now, there's a second tier of blue uncommons, but a couple of them I do really like. I like In Bolas's Clutches, Weight of Memory, and Wizard's Retort. Now, In Bolas's Clutches is the best of these 3, I think by a mile, to be honest. Even though this does cost an awful lot, I do like these control magic type of effects in Sealed, even when they cost 6 mana, because it's a virtual 2-for-1. Your opponent loses their best creature, and you get a creature. So not only do they lose something, you gain something, and it's often the best creature on the board. So this thing can dig you out of bad situations really easily and put you way ahead when, they have one dude that's really good, but you've got the best board aside from that. So I really like this. Again, there's going to be a lot of people who are really excited about playing some of these crazy, dumb, stupid legends, these huge guys, and the ability to steal those is going to be heartbreaking and hilarious to some. Now, again, Weight of Memory and Wizard's Retort are, I think, a step down from all the other stuff I've talked about so far, but with Wizard's Retort, it's still going to be important to have a hard counter in this format. We really don't have a whole lot of counter spells, period, surprisingly, in the Dominaria sealed environment, and this is easily the best one. If you do have a wizard out, it's that much better, but even if you have to hard cast it for 3 mana, that's still fine. You'd be surprised how good a cancel can be in sealed. And to boot, by the way, a sealed environment where a lot of the best cards cost 4, 5, 6 mana, they're above 3. Most of the really effective cards that take over the game by themselves in this set period are, these 5, 6, sometimes more mana legends. And the ability to just pay 3 mana and, deal with those forever is a lot more desirable in this seal environment than it usually is because there's just a higher concentration of, really expensive bombs. And as far as Weight of Memory goes, it's 5 mana, but drawing 3 cards is a huge refill in the late or mid game. Or, let's say you rip this, you top deck this on turn 8 or 9. This can be an amazing refill, and you can still have mana left that late in the game to cast whatever you draw with it. Plus, you never know what you might hit when you mill your opponent. You could always hit one of their, again, the creature they've been most excited about playing this whole time. You mill it right into their graveyard. That won't happen super often, but when it does, it's a pretty good payoff. Now, honestly, I think that blue is doing more work at the common slot, though. It gets cards like Academy Drake, Academy Journey Mage, and Blink of an Eye. Now, Academy Drake is great. It's just a classic Wind Drake, 3 mana, 2 power flyers are just good in sealed. They're just always good. And this has the ability late in the game to be even better. I really like this sealed environment because there's going to be a lot of good top decks. Cards with kicker and stuff like that are going to be fantastic in this environment, and this is a good example. You play it early, it's a solid creature. You play it late, it's maybe the best creature on the board. As As far as Academy Journey Mage, this is another kind of card that we see in just about every set nowadays. It's lurking in almost every sealed environment. It's always solid. You know, creatures that bounce stuff when they come into play are almost always decent. So I'd play it if I had a pretty high concentration of wizards. And Blink of an Eye sort of counts as the common combat trick in blue. You won't always play it as a combat trick, obviously, but the ability to bounce something, keep it from dealing damage to you, or, you know, maybe save one of your own permanents is always pretty good, and drawing a card is fantastic. So I really like Blink of an Eye. I think at the common slot especially, it's pretty good value. As far as other commons I'd keep an eye out for in blue, there's Cloud Reader Sphinx, Deep Freeze, and Syncopate. Cloud Reader Sphinx looks really solid to me, you know, pretty decent flying body for a relatively high cost, but honestly, as far as the stats to converted mana cost ratio, I think you're looking at a pretty good creature here. Plus the Scry is delicious gravy, puts it over the top for me. Fixing your draws and sealed is really desirable, plus the flying body is nice. Deep Freeze is essentially just blue sort of removal. The creature gets to stay out and keep blocking and stuff, but this can really neutralize a lot of these crazy, dumb, stupid legends that we're going to be seeing a lot of. I like that. You know, those are in the rare slot. You're not going to see them all the time, but almost everyone's going to open one or two stupid bomb rare creatures that are legendary in this set, at the very least. And I like having, you know, tools in the common and uncommon slot to neutralize those threats, and this is a decent way of doing it if you're stuck in blue. Same thing with Syncopate, you know, a lot of these 5, 6, 7 mana stupid things that people are trying to do in the sealed environment. A Syncopate for just 2 or 3 mana can stop cold. Syncopate's also sometimes decent in the early game, especially if you got to go first. Syncopate can be a very strong card for denying crucial early game plays to the opponent. Now, to sort of finish up our thoughts on blue, I'd also kind of keep an eye out for Sentinel of the Pearl Triton, Tetsuko, and Divination. Now, Divination's nothing special, but it is Divination in the sealed environment. It's card advantage for just 3 mana, which has always been a card that you probably can find a slot for, especially in slower, defensive, or more controlling decks. Divination is surprisingly where you want to be in sealed. Now, these two creatures are a little bit more case-sensitive, honestly. Tetsuko really depends on the concentration of 1 power and 1 toughness creatures that you get, but do note that she's always unblockable, at least, until you until you increase her power in some way. But at her base stats, she is always unblockable, and that's pretty good in and of itself, and once you get past the declare blocker steps, you can always use instant speed tricks to increase her power once she goes unblocked. So do remember that. That can be important, but if you've got a few other decent 1 power or 1 toughness creatures in your sealed pool, Tetsuko can actually be a pretty good weapon. Now, Sentinel of the Pearl Triton is a little bit more limited. There are going to be times where you want to save a legendary creature or save an artifact or even a saga sometimes. And do know that this can also reset a saga for you if you needed to. I think there's a lot of cool edge cases with Sentinel, and there's always the fact that these, creatures with flash can be effectively used as removal against attacking creatures. So you got to remember that too. There's a lot of cool uses for this, but I wouldn't, trip over myself to put it in my deck. But I do think that if you get a couple of sagas that you might want to reset, or maybe a couple of big legendaries you might want to save, then Sentinel is a pretty decent creature. It's got, the keyword ability is fantastic on it too. It can be used as a removal. There's a lot of edge cases where this is a good creature. Now, don't get me wrong here. I think that blue has its fair share of impressive cards. I just highlighted a few of them there for you. But I think that color by color, blue has the least amount, the fewest impressive cards to me in this set at least. Now, again, I think there's definitely some blue stuff that you want to play. Like if you get the big, 5/6 flying genie thing, that could maybe put you in blue. That can end the game really fast. But for the most part, I don't think that blue is super impressive this time around. It's got some stuff I want, but not a whole lot that's going to just straight up put me in blue. So I'm going to have to probably just give it a C this time. I think it's the least impressive color, and there are some cool support things you can do, plus some crazy stuff you can do if you get a Texaco and some cool stuff to go with her. But for the most part, I don't think that blue is super scary this time. So we'll move on to black, and black actually has a bunch of really good-looking uncommons, in my opinion. I want to first look at the Eldest Reborn, Urgaros, and Lingering Phantom here. Well, the Eldest Reborn is surprisingly just an uncommon, and look at what it does. There's actually straight-up card advantage on this card. They lose a card when you first cast it. They have to sacrifice something. They lose a card by discarding the second turn it's in play, and then you get something back from a graveyard the third turn it's in play. That's a ton of card advantage stretched out over a few turns. So I really like this. The reanimation aspect of it is great, but at the floor of it, at the very worst, it's removal against 1 creature, and that's fine. I'll take it. As far as Urgoros is concerned, though, this is a standout black creature. I'm not a huge fan of the toughness, especially at this mana cost. There's a lot of flying creatures that can take this down, so I'm a little concerned that it is a trap, but it's a big, powered flying creature that once it does get in is either going to suck a card from them or get you a card. No matter what happens, if it gets through, it's crazy. And it's pretty easy to get a flying creature through in Limited. So even though it does fall to a few too many flying creatures in this format for me, it's still a big meaty flyer with a crazy combat damage ability, and those tend to be very good in sealed. Now, Lingering Phantom is a bit deceptive. This doesn't look like much at first glance. It's a bit of a high casting cost, but the stats are real. This is a very big creature, especially in a sealed environment. This is actually one of the bigger creatures in the set, and if they somehow do kill it, all you got to do is cast one legend or one artifact or one saga. That's all you got to do is top deck one of 3 different card types, and Lingering Phantom will come right back. Phantasm looks really, really good to me, actually. These kind of creatures with recursion are always fine in any limited environment, especially sealed, and I don't see that being any different here. Phantasm looks like a deceptively great creature. As far as other uncommons that I like in black, there's removal like Settle the Score and Cast Down, but I also really like Thallid Soothsayer. Now, pay no attention to the Planeswalker clause on Settle the Score. Yeah, in some limited games, it has a very corner chance of mattering, but for the most part, this just exiles something, and that's what you care about. It's playable removal, same thing with Cast Down. There's a lot of legends in this format, but there's more creatures that aren't legendary than there are legendaries. So, Cast Down has a really good chance of hitting some good target for you. So, especially some of these big, dumb green creatures that you'll see a little bit later, Cast Down's very good against all of them. So, I'd play it. I'd play 2 copies if I got it. And Thallid Soothsayer. This doesn't look like much on its face, but I really like the idea no matter what package it's in sealed. I like the idea of trading chump blocks for cards. That's always great, you know. Or if you're up on board advantage, board position, but you can't get through, sometimes it's worth sacrificing a creature or 2 to draw a card. So I actually like this. A lot. This is another one of those cards that looks deceptively good to me. Turning a chump block into a card is ridiculous. But black has its fair share of commons that are really attractive too. I like Deathbloom Thallid, Thallid Omnivore, and Dark Bargain, first of all. Now, Deathbloom is another one of those 3-mana 3/2s. That means it's going to trade with a lot, even stuff higher up on the curve than it is. That's always desirable in a limited creature, but when it does trade, it's going to leave you up on board advantage. You know, they lost something, but you still lost a big dude, but you at least got a creature back. That's going to give you a pretty good chance of being up on board position, and that can make all the difference in sealed. So Deathbloom looks good to me. Same thing with Thallid Omnivore. This thing can get very scary when it's swinging in. You know, you swing in with it without sacrificing anything, and if they choose to block it, whether or not they choose to block it really, then you can make it huge. This is a very, very, scary creature to have to be on the receiving end of, especially on a relatively full board. That you can do an awful lot with this. As far as Dark Bargain goes, in slower, more control-your defensive decks, I like this. This is just straight-up card advantage that comes with really good selection on it, too, you know. Instant speed, 4 mana is a little bit steep, but still, for a card advantage spell like this in Sealed, I'll gladly pay 4 mana. This is a good card. Other black commons to look for are Eviscerate, Vicious Offering, and Blessing of Belzenlock. Now, Blessing of Belzenlock is the common combat trick in black, and it looks pretty solid to me. Very low mana investment, even if you're not casting it on a legend. It looks decent, but if you are casting it on a legend, it can be a serious blowout out of nowhere, and it shouldn't be too hard to pick up a few legends. There's supposed to be 1 in every pack, so theoretically, you'll get 6 in your sealed pool. Or more even, possibly. So it's not unheard of, at least, that you actually will get the chance to cast this on a legend, and then it's devastating. So I actually like this card a lot. And Eviscerate and Vicious Offering, what can I say? These are just really, really good, solid, playable removal spells. You'll probably play every copy that you pick up. But bat and clean up for black, there are some other cards I want to briefly talk about. Those being Yargle, Knight of Malice, and Fungal Infection. Well, Yargle looks like a bit of a trap. That is a high power, obviously, but it's a really low toughness. This trades with stuff below it on the curve. Usually you don't want that, but if you get just about any aura, this can be great, especially auras that grant it flying. There's a 1-mana blue aura that gives a creature +1/+1 in flying. Yargle finishes the game in 2 swings, if you can get that combo going. On Sarah's Wings is a white card that gives a creature +1/+1 flying, and lifelinks in there too, so Yargle just becomes an unstoppable killing machine. If you can get the right auras on it, I'd look out for that. As far as Knight of Malice, again, just like the white one, solid 2-mana creature that does an awful lot for your very low investment and shirks off a good amount of removal in this format. Knight of Malice is just a great creature. And Fungal Infection is a lot better than it looks. There's a lot of 1-toughness stuff and 1-toughness tokens and stuff too. In this sealed environment, this is going to kill. And obviously, if you just use this as a combat trick, for just 1 mana too, very low investment again. Then sometimes you can take out big stuff with smaller creatures and again still leave behind board presence. I like a lot about Fungal Infection. That's something you don't hear every day. I like a lot about Fungal Infection. But anyway, I like a lot about black, period, in this environment. I do think it's one of the better colors that we're looking at. Usually black has great removal, but not amazing creatures. And actually, I think this time around, black has great removal and some really good creatures too. There's even some decent black creatures I didn't talk about this time around. It doesn't have some of the standouts that colors like green have, you know, obviously. But there are still some crazy, dumb black flyers in this set that you can ride to victory pretty easily, and even creatures like Yargle that again you get 1 aura on them and you win the game. So it's got dumb explosive bomb threats, it's got really good removal. There's just not really much that black doesn't have, so I'll give it a solid B+ this time around. I think it's one of the better colors you could be playing. Which brings us to Riggedy Red. Now, Red has some really good playable stuff at both common and uncommon. I think that it's balanced at the uncommon and uncommon slot, but most of the really disgusting stuff is in the rare slot. But don't let that fool you. There's obviously still commons and uncommons I want to talk about. Starting with Fight with Fire, Wizard's Lightning, and Goblin Barrage. Now, these are all just playable removal spells, and Fight with Fire can be really good in the very, very late game. If the game goes very long and you have this much mana, you can just finish the game with a Fight Fire. You know, Fight with Fire looks ridiculous as just decent playable removal that's going to kill just about every creature, and just a game ender when you need it to be. I'd pick up every copy of this that I found. Now, note with Goblin Barrage, it's always going to kill something, but it can kill something and hit your opponent in the face if you have the right things out. And it's not too hard, honestly, to have a Goblin or a Historic card or whatever, an artifact. It's not too hard to have either one of those things out. So Goblin Barrage can hit the face, but it's always going to kill a creature, and that's mostly what you're looking for. Wizard's Lightning, I'll say the same thing. Even if you don't have a wizard out, this is very playable, but when you do, it's ridiculous. But one way or the other, it goes in your deck. Even if you don't have Wizard 1, this is in your deck. But the uncommon slot in red actually houses a bunch of creatures that I really like too. Chief among them, Firefist Adept, Skizik, and Warcry Phoenix. Now, Firefist Adept doesn't look like a whole heck of a lot, but it's a 3/3 for 5, not a great deal, but when you tack on the fact that it's always going to deal at least 1 damage to something, that's cool. If you've got 2 wizards out, you know, this and something else, it's almost definitely going to kill something when it hits the battlefield. Creatures that, basically bodies that are also removal are always all-star, sealed cards and draft cards. I really like this. Despite the fact it doesn't look like much at first, it's a body that can removal. It's a body that can body things. You'll take that every time. And Skizik, just a, big, imposing, hasty threat that can come down and eat planeswalkers up if you needed to. It can sometimes, just deal huge chunks of damage when you wanted to. The kicker is very, very low on this, sometimes very often worth waiting the turn. So I do like Skizik. It's one of the better creatures at lower rarity in all of red. Same thing with Warcry Phoenix. If you can get this to come back just the one time in an aggressive deck, I think it's probably paid for itself at that point, but any more than that, and it's just ridiculous. Recursive threats are great, evasive threats are great, and this combines 2 of those things in sealed. That's pretty good. The only bad thing about Phoenix is that it's terrible when you're behind, but I'll take it for the upside. But there are a bunch of red commons that I like too. Again, I think there's some balance in red here. I like Shivan Fire and Fiery Intervention again as playable removal spells. Shivan Fire looks especially good. Actually, I know that sounds weird, but in the early game, this is going to eat up Lawn Orels and other small creatures. And in the late game, this is great. It's an efficient way to spend your mana to kill just about any threat in the whole format. Well over 70% of the creatures in the format, a kicked Shivan Fire can deal with. So it's going to be a really, really critical removal spell. And Fiery Intervention ain't half bad either, as far as common removal spells go. But red actually gets 2 decent combat tricks at common, where a lot of spells only get the 1. It gets Run Amok and Fervent Strike. I like both of these. Now, Run Amok only works on attackers, but that's a huge power toughness boost. And Trample, which is almost certainly going to be worth it in a lot of situations. Whatever's getting blocked is just going to bowl over whatever's blocking it and probably deal a couple extra points of damage for you. I really like Run Amok. And Fervent Strike, these are always really tricky. We see these in sealed environments a lot. These little 1-mana red combat tricks, they give a little boost plus First Strike, are always a lot more playable than they look. This is a deceptively good card. Also note that it gives the creature First Strike. That means Quinde is, a pretty important creature in this situation. If you've got a Quinde out and you cast this on another creature, that suddenly gives the creature double strike. Not to mention that it also throws haste into the mix, so if you've got this and the mana to cast it, you can just, really take them by surprise with whatever huge threat you cast that turn. So I like a lot about this. As a combat trick and a haste enabler, this does a lot. But two creatures that I really like in common and red are Gitu Chronicler and Keldon Overseer. Now, Keldon Overseer, when kicked, is unbelievable. These threatened effects are good and sealed, but even if you're not kicking it, you don't want to spend all that mana, this is fine in the early game, especially if you're in an aggressive deck and you win first. Usually you can get this in for 3 pretty easily on turn 3, and note that it follows up a Tetsuko really, really well if you happen to pick up one of those in your sealed pool too. And as far as Chronicler, this is great because it's a decent blocking body in the early game, yes, and it's got the right creature type. It's a wizard, but it also is great in the late game. A good top deck, like all the top deck action with the kicker in this format. That's great in sealed. That's great for ending games. This essentially can get you back a huge splashy bomb spell, but sometimes more importantly, this can get you back a removal piece, which is great. Again, basically sort of a Necrotal type effect, sort of. If you can get a removal spell back with this, you've essentially cast a body that also basically removed a creature. This kind of card advantage is really good. Now, the stuff that I want to sort of clean up red with here, it's all edge cases, but I think they're important cards. There's Valduk, there's also Champion of the Flame, and Radiating Lightning. Now, Radiating Lightning I don't think goes in the main deck, but you do want to keep an eye on the main deck that your opponent's playing with in Game 1 to see if Radiating Lightning is worth bringing in Game 2. If you see a lot of tokens or a lot of 1-toughness creatures, Radiating Lightning can be a 2-for-1 very easily that also hits them in the face, and that's when it's at its best. But I don't know that it's worth main deck ability. But, again, if your opponent's playing with a lot of 1-toughness creatures or tokens, Radiating Lightning can be really effective in Game 2 and 3. As far as Valduk and Champion of the Flame, these are both similar creatures in that they'll go in that red-white aura and equipment deck that I've referred to a couple of times. Just get an aura on either one of these dudes and they can both wreak havoc, whether they're making creatures like Valduk can, or they're just getting unbelievably huge, like Champion of the Flame can. I like both of these if you have the auras or equipment to support them. And that's red. Now, again, most of red's raw power is in the rare slot. Things like Varric's Bladewing are intensely good creatures in sealed that can win a game really easily. And most of the power, again, is at the rare slot. It's mostly balanced at common and uncommon. There's plenty of stuff that you want to play, but nothing hyper impressive. That means that red is a good color, a better color than it sometimes has been in the past. Sometimes the only reason you'd ever play red is decent-ish removal spells, but at least red's a little bit more balanced. It's got some pretty aggressive creatures that I want to play. It's got some good stuff way up there on the curve that I might want to play too. Some really good stuff with kicker. So I like red, but again, it could be a little bit better. I'll give it a solid B this time. Which brings us to green. Now, green looks really good to me this time around, as it has for the last couple of sealed environments, and that has ended up panning out. Green was one of the better colors in Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan sealed, and it looks to continue its string of good performances in Dominaria. So let's start with the uncommons here. Some stuff I really like is Thorn Elemental, Untamed Kavu, and Grun the Lonely King to begin. Now, Thorn Elemental is just really scary, and it's 7 mana, yeah, but when you actually get to it, and you get to untap with it, your opponent can't properly answer it, you just end the game. It just more or less ends the game 90% of the time. This was the king of sealed back in the day. I don't see it being any different. Thorn Elemental is just really scary. Untamed Kavu, too, looks really good, though, too. This is just 2 mana for a bear, 2 mana 2/2, with 2 really relevant keyword abilities, and if you kick it into play, it's crazy. A 5/5 Vigilance Trample is a hell of a creature to have to deal with for an opponent. This can just swing through defenses, plow over creatures, and still stay up to block once you've kicked it into play. This is a very good card, especially at just uncommon. Same thing with Groon, this is just uncommon, and it's a huge dude. Now, I don't necessarily like a vanilla 6-mana 5/5, but at least it's a huge creature. But when you can kick it into play, this thing gets super dumb. They'll just have to chump it or die every single turn when you kick it into play, and I like that. This thing can take over a game pretty quickly. If they can't answer it, they just have to chump it until they're out of, they exhaust all of their options. But of course, that's not all. The other green uncommons I really like are Spore Swarm, Elfin Druid, and Song of Prerelease. Now, Song of Prerelease is a bit of an edge case, but it's always going to do something for you, It can ramp you in the early game if that's when you get it and you need the ramp and you got a couple of creatures floating around. I think that's fine, but in almost any situation, once you roll around to that, put a +1/+1 counter on everything and they all get crazy abilities for a turn or whatever, like that is really, really good. Even if you top deck this on turn 7 or 8, then if you can roll around 2 turns later, if you can get to that point in the game, this thing can create huge swings in board position. So I do like Song of Prerelease. I think it's actually a better top deck than it looks like at first glance, provided that you can make it a couple of turns. Elfin Druid is just your standard, tap me for mana kind of elf, and those are almost always good in a limited environment and even a constructed environment, but this one is especially good for helping you cast kick spells, and you won't get a whole lot of help with that in this set outside of a choice few cards, and this is one of them, so you'll take it, especially if you're trying to kick stuff into play. And then Spore Swarm, the instant speed really sells me on this. Casting it during your opponent's combat step looks great. As a form of removal, that's good, especially a form of removal that can leave body behind, or bodies behind sometimes even. That's great. Or you just cast it at the end of your opponent's turn sometimes. I just like a lot about Spore Swarm. 3 bodies is, a board on 1 card, and that's always good and sealed. But of course, there are a bunch of green commons that I want to get to as well. There's Gift of Growth, Lawn War Elves, and Saproling Migration to start off. Now, green gets a couple of decent common combat tricks, but I definitely think that the best of the bunch is Gift of Growth. This is a decent combat trick in and of itself that scales really well in the late game. You can get a creature in for a bunch, or make even a tiny creature survive that has no business surviving. Make the Lawn War Elves that's blocking a 4/4 survive, and kill the 4/4. It's entirely possible with a Gift of Growth, and I really like this card. As far as combat tricks go, I think it's one of the best in the entire set. The Lawn War Elves, by the way, just obligatory mention of Lawn War Elves, sealed is a relatively slow format. So if you can drop a Lawn War Elves on turn 1 and get a 3-drop turn 2, or hey, if you can drop, a Lawn War Elves on turn 3 and get a 5-drop turn 4, that's really good by most standards in a sealed game. So Lawn War Elves is always going to be at least decent. In Saproling Migration, this is another token creating card, but this one can get out of hand. Again, I like these kicker spells in sealed more than I like them in just about any format. If you cast this for 2 mana, it's 2 bodies. That's good board presence in sealed. I like that already. Cards like this are always good in sealed, but 4 bodies for 6 mana, while it doesn't scale super well, it scales pretty poorly, actually, but if you do have the 6 mana, 4 bodies is a lot of bodies. There's so many bodies in sealed. To be getting all at one time, you'll definitely take that. That's pretty good once you can kick it. But even more green commons that I'm interested in are Baloth Gorger, Ancient Animus, and Mammoth Spider. Now, Baloth Gorger is one of the best green commons, period. This scales really well. If you cast it in the late game, it's almost certainly the biggest creature on the board. But if you cast it for its original mana cost, you got a sturdy body at a decent cost. It passes the vanilla test. 4 mana, 4 power dude. That's totally fine with me. Decent toughness while we're at it, too. So I like Baloth Gorger. Again, just like the Blue Drake that scales well, I like 4 mana 4/4s. I like, 3 mana 2/2 flyers. But I also like when we can scale those creatures to be fantastic if we happen to top deck them, and Baloth Gorger is a perfect example. Ancient Animus is green removal, and the wording is a little bit confusing here, but yes, you can cast this on a creature regardless of whether or not that creature is legendary. It's just much better if the creature is. That's gravy value, but at instant speed for 2 mana, these fight effects are at their best in sealed. I don't usually like these in constructed formats, but green will take whatever removal it can get access to, and this is surprisingly good. And finally, Mammoth Spider might not look like much, but again, this is a deceptively good card, This is going to take out and survive against a vast amount of flyers in this format. And it's just a stocky attacker by itself, It's got a huge butt. It's going to survive most combat situations, even on the ground. It can be an opposing attacker when it needs to, but it's a really good defensive creature against a great deal of flyers in this environment. Now to finish up green here, the other cards I'm interested in are Grow from the Ashes, Yavimaya Sapherd, and Primordial Worm. All commons this time. Now, I'll briefly just talk about Primordial Worm here. It's a huge guy for 6 mana. Seems a little bit steep in sealed even, but it is common, and it's got 7 power. That's probably about the right rate for 6 mana. It's just kind of cool. This is common, and it's absolutely huge. This is worth talking about, if only for a second. As far as Yavimaya Sapherd, this is another one of those board-in-a-box cards, green. It gets 3 of these at least at a lower rarity. And I really like all of these. I really like Jungleborn Pioneer from the last sealed environment, and that makes me like this card a lot too. There are lords that can pump these up if you want them to, but this is just solid out of the gate by itself. Gives you enough power and toughness for its casting cost, and gives you multiple attackers and blockers. That's always good in sealed, no matter which way you slice it. As far as Grow from the Ashes, I'm really interested in this. Again, there's a ton of stuff in this set that cost a lot of mana, or if you want to pay the kicker cost, you have to pay a lot of mana. And this can help you get to it. Getting 2 lands is very good, and this helps fix your mana too. I want to point out, by the way, that there are no common or uncommon dual lands in this set. There are some at the rare slot, but you're very unlikely to see them. So you'll take all the fixing you can get, and Grow from the Ashes is a great way to fix your mana, but it's also a great way to get to all this big ticket stuff that you want to cast to end the game. Now, sealed is all about threats and removal. Now, we could go into, board advantage, card advantage, and the grindy game and stuff like that, but for the most part, at the end of the day, really sealed comes down to threats and removal. In this set, a lot of different colors have decent removal, but green has easily the best threats, and even a removal piece that's at least playable. Obviously, it doesn't have all the best removal or anything, but green has far and away the best creatures in the sealed environment, even despite the fact it doesn't get a whole lot of flyers, if any, for that matter. But it doesn't matter. Green holds down the ground like crazy in this environment with some of the most, aggressively costed creatures we've seen in the sealed environment in a really long time. I like green a lot here, whether it's a support color just to play fatties, and you just play black removal and stuff, or it's your primary color and you're just trying to roll over everybody with huge green dudes. I think you can do both of those things with great success in this format, and I don't think that your sealed pool has to include a whole bunch of green cards for it to include a bunch of good green cards. So I'm going to give green a gold star here and say that I'm going to give it an A. Right there with black, honestly. I think that black almost dunks, just barely grazes the rim and gets that B+. But even without, fancy removal or really good flyers, I think that green just has such a high concentration of great threats and good value creatures that it probably takes the crown for me in terms of what colors I like the most going into the sealed. Now, before we get out of here, I just want to briefly touch on the artifacts and the gold cards. Now, first, the gold cards. There are a ton of, even at the uncommon slot, gold legends in this set, and nearly all of them are playable to some extent. I'm somewhat impressed by a lot of these, but the 3 absolute best in my mind are these guys right here. Tiana, Tatiova, and Slimefoot. These all look amazing in sealed to me. Slimefoot not only can get in some incidental damage and some life gain for you, but best thing about it, it's a mana sink that makes dudes. That is always insane in sealed, and Slimefoot can do that. He can win the game for you by himself. As far as the others, Tatiova, just insane card advantage. Once you get her down, turns your bad top decks that are just lands into really good top decks that draw you extra cards and gain you life, keep you in the game, and it's at least a solid body in and of itself. Tatiova's ridiculous. Filthy card. Same thing with Tiana. A lot of these legends at the uncommon slot have 3 power and 3 toughness. But I think Tiana's the best of the bunch, mostly because of the flying and obviously the first strike. Flying in first strike with 3 power is a really potent combination of things in this sealed environment where we have a lot of flyers that are at 3 toughness. There's some flyers that are above 3 toughness, yes, but a lot of the common and uncommon and, the flyers that we're going to see a lot of are 2 and 3 toughness in this format. So a 3 power flyer that has first strike is crazy. And there's card advantage available off of this thing too, in the red-white Auras deck. If they do kill something with an Aura on it, at least you didn't lose the Aura. That's great. So I really like Tiana an awful lot, in sealed specifically. Same thing with draft, by the way. The red-white Aura or equipment deck is going to be a specific draft archetype, and Tiana is going to be what you're looking for in that archetype. And as far as the artifacts here, there are some really attractive artifacts. As far as the uncommons, I like Icy Manipulator, Urza's Tome, and Juggernaut. Juggernaut's just a big, meaty creature any aggressive deck can play, regardless of what color it is, and it's at very least going to trade with something, and at the very most, it's going to deal like 5, 10, 15 damage for you, because your opponent can't find a decent answer for it. Juggernaut's always been a solid creature in Sealed, not going to change anytime soon. But the other two I really like. Same thing with Icy, by the way, always been a solid creature in Sealed, or a solid artifact in Sealed. This thing just does all of the things once it's down. You know, it deprives your opponent of a mana every turn if that's what you want. Deprives your opponent of their one colored source of mana that they need during their, just tap it down during their upkeep. They can't use it for their entire turn. That's great. It taps down the best creature on the other side of the board so that you can get in or that it can attack. There's just so much that Ice Manipulator does. I think it's worth playing in just about any Sealed deck. And Urza's Tome looks like a standout to me. This is a relatively low cost, at least its casting cost, artifact to play. And it helps you see more cards than your opponent, which is just always good in Sealed. Being able to fly through your cards faster, usually great way to win in the Sealed environment. Whoever sees more cards, usually going to win the game, as a general rule, and this helps you see cards really, really well. Now, the activation cost is a bit much, but it is at least good to have a mana sink, frame it positively. And again, drawing cards is great. Period. It's great. But there are some commons in the artifacts that I want to talk about, however briefly here. There's Esther Glider, Skittering Surveyor, and Blood Tallow Candle. Now, Blood Tallow Candle doesn't look like much, and 6 mana is a heck of an activation cost. That's pretty far up there, but it's removal in a deck that doesn't have access to all the removal. If you're heavy green or whatever, and you just don't have a bunch of good removal pieces, this can at least be good, especially in green where you have ramp options. So I think Blood Tallow Candle is at least worth playing sometimes. Skittering Surveyor, another great way to fix your mana in a format that doesn't really have a lot of options for fixing mana. Skittering Surveyor is a way for any deck to do it and put a body on the battlefield to block. That slows the game down and gets you the resources you need. Surveyor is actually way better than it reads at first glance. And as far as Esther Glider, I talked about this. I think this is a really neat card, actually. I like 3 mana, 2 power flyers in the Sealed environment. And this is one literally any deck can play, even though it can only block flyers. I'm not that concerned with it. These are usually for attacking anyway, so that's fine. 3 mana, 2 power flyer that any deck can play, sign me up, that's cool. And I think we've made it. That is all of what I consider to be the best cards in every color in this Sealed environment. Now, by the way, I want to bring this up. Just because I didn't mention a card doesn't mean that it's a terrible bad card you should never play. Dominaria looks so good for the Sealed environment, for the limited environment period, that, honestly, just in case you've been playing for a while, as far as limited, I think this is the best set since, Return to Ravnica. For limited. See, this set looks really good for limited, period. Whether you're drafting or whether you're playing Sealed, this looks like a very good set. There are a ton of viable cards in. So just because I didn't bring a card up doesn't mean it's bad, it's awful, and you should tear it up and never play it and throw it in the garbage and set it on fire. It's not necessarily true. These are just all the cards that I like the most. But anyway, I'm pretty sure that I'm tapped out for this one. I hope you enjoy your Sealed. Again, they're super chill events. Really good vibes. These are great events. A lot of people, the only events they go to all year are these pre-release events. Because again, they're just super good vibes, man. Everybody's laid back, having fun. And if you aren't used to a competitive or organized Magic environment, this is a great way to dip your toes. Because everyone's pretty happy at these. For the most part, there's always that 5% that's trying to get one over. You gotta watch out for that guy. But for the most part, these are really, really laid-back events that almost anyone can enjoy and have a lot of fun at. So I hope you enjoy yours, and I hope that this video helps you in some way. If you liked the video, I hope you liked the video, and sub for more content. Hit the bell for the notifications to make sure you know when I put out new videos, because it is high time. A lot of good content coming out here in this next week or two. Not only are we going to do list videos this week, top 15 cards in Dominaria, top 10 sleepers, all that exciting stuff, but starting very early next week, maybe even late this week, possibly, we're going to start doing deck techs. So all the best content's coming up. Make sure you sub for that. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, or help the channel keep going by kicking me $1 on Patreon. Link in the description for that. You can also help out my sponsor, TCG Player. They're good folks. They help your boy out. They're good folks. They're also where you can pre-order any of these cards I talked about and any card from Dominaria, period, for the cheapest prices on the whole internet, or you can just order a whole box for about $92, which is a heck of a deal right about now, and maybe a better deal after the set comes out. A lot of people are speculating this This is one of the best sets in years, myself included. So go ahead and get in there. Pre-order a box for pretty cheap. Link in the description if you want to check them out too. But I'm pretty sure that really is it this time. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. And remember, especially while you're at your pre-release, spread love and be kind.